First of all, take a deep breath, turn off the lights, get comfortable in bed, and open your heart. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a deep dive into a love that was never meant to happen, but could never be forgotten. Get ready, because when love is forbidden, it burns even stronger. And now the story begins. The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Hamptons ballroom, where Manhattan's elite gather for the annual charity gala. I never believed in fate until that September evening, when destiny wore a midnight blue gown and walked into my perfectly ordered world. My name is James Wellington, and I had my life mapped out with surgical precision. Harvard Law, partnership track at the city's most prestigious firm, engagement to Charlotte Whitmore, a union that would merge two of New York's oldest families. Everything calculated, everything safe, everything utterly predictable. Until I saw her. She stood by the French doors leading to the garden, a vision that made my breath catch in my throat. Victoria Martinez moved with an unconscious grace that set her apart from every other woman in that room. Her dark hair cascaded in soft waves over her bare shoulders, and when she turned, her emerald eyes held a fire that promised danger and passion in equal measure. She didn't belong in this world of old money and older traditions. Everything about her screamed rebellion. From the way she held her champagne glass, like she was ready to throw it, to the slight smile playing at her lips as she observed our social theater with obvious amusement. I should have looked away, should have returned to Charlotte's side, to safe conversations about country clubs and vacation homes. Instead, I found myself crossing that crowded ballroom like a man possessed, drawn by a force I couldn't name or resist. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," I said, approaching her with what I hoped was casual confidence. She turned those devastating green eyes on me, and I felt something fundamental shift in my chest. "And you look like you've never want to be anywhere else but exactly where you're supposed to be," she replied, her voice carrying a slight accent that made every word sound like music. "Maybe tonight, I don't want to be where I'm supposed to be." The words tumbled out before I could stop them, foreign and reckless on my tongue. Her eyebrows rose in surprise, and then she laughed. A sound so genuine and uninhibited that it cut through pretentious chatter around us like a blade. "James Wellington, I offer my hand, knowing this simple gesture would change everything. Victoria Martinez." Her fingers were warm against mine, and the contact sent electricity racing up my arm. She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did I. We stood there, hands clasped, while the world continued spinning around us, unaware that two hearts had just recognized their missing pieces. "Would you like to dance?" The question escaped before my rational mind could intervene. "I don't dance to their music," she said, but her eyes held challenge, not refusal. "Then we'll make our own." I led her through the crowd, past the disapproving glances of my mother's friends, past Charlotte's confused stare, past everything that had defined my existence until that moment. The orchestra was playing some classical piece that matched the evening's refined atmosphere. But when Victoria stepped into my arms, all I could hear was a thundering of my own heartbeat. Her body fit against mine as if it had been designed for this purpose. My hand found the small of her back, and through the silk of her dress, I could feel the warmth of her skin. She was petite compared to my 6-foot frame, but everything about her presence was larger than life. "You're playing with fire," she whispered as we moved together, her breath warm against my ear. "Maybe I want to burn," I murmured back, surprised at myself at my honesty. Her eyes widened slightly, and I saw something vulnerable flicker beneath her confident facade. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know me. Then tell me." My grip tightened on her hand. "Tell me everything." As we swayed to the music, she began to speak in low tones that only I could hear. She told me about her art, her studio in Brooklyn where she painted pieces that galleries were starting to notice. She spoke of growing up in Queens, of working 3 jobs to put herself through college, of dreams that didn't include champagne wishes and caviar expectations. Every word she spoke painted her further away from my world, and yet drew me deeper under her spell. She was everything I'd been taught to avoid. Unpredictable, passionate, dangerous to the careful life I constructed. "What about you?" she asked as the song began to end. "What does James Wellington want when nobody's watching?" The question hit me like a physical blow. When had anyone ever asked me what I wanted? Not what was expected, not what was proper, but what I truly desired. I began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the honesty she demanded. I want to see your paintings. I want to know what makes you laugh at 2 in the morning. I want to understand how you can look at all this. I gestured at the opulent ballroom with such beautiful disdain. And I want to know, she said, her voice barely audible as she leaned closer, what it would feel like to completely corrupt a good man. The words hit me like lightning, and I had to fight the urge to pull her against me right there on the dance floor. The song ended, but neither of us moved. We stood there, breathing hard, staring into each other's eyes as if we could see the future written there. Victoria. Charlotte's voice cut through our trance like a blade. James. Darling, who is your friend? Reality crashed back with brutal force. Charlotte stood beside us, her perfect smile not quite hiding the ice in her blue eyes. Everything I was supposed to want, everything that made sense, everything safe and predictable stood in stark contrast to the fire burning in Victoria's gaze. Charlotte, this is Victoria Martinez. I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Victoria, my fiancée, Charlotte Whitmore. I watched Victoria's face carefully, expecting to see disappointment or anger. Instead, her lips curved in that same mysterious smile that had first captured my attention. How lovely to meet you, Victoria said, extending her hand to Charlotte with perfect grace. James was just telling me about the charity work your family does. It was a lie, smooth as silk, and somehow that made it even more thrilling. She was protecting our moment, keeping it sacred from Charlotte's intrusion. Yes, well, Charlotte's grip on my arm tightened possessively. We should return to our table. Mother will be looking for us. Of course. I looked one last time into Victoria's eyes, trying to memorize every fleck of gold in that sea of green. It was a pleasure meeting you, Victoria. The pleasure, she said, her voice carrying layers of meaning that made my pulse race, was entirely mine. As Charlotte led me away, I felt Victoria's gaze burning into my back. Every step felt like betrayal. Every word Charlotte spoke sounded like noise. I had tasted something extraordinary, something that made everything else in my life feel like a pale imitation of living. Later that night, as Charlotte chattered about wedding plans and I nodded at appropriate intervals, my mind was entirely consumed by emerald eyes and the promise of beautiful corruption. I knew I should forget her, should lock away this dangerous attraction, and focus on a life I'd always planned. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my penthouse apartment, I could still feel the ghost of her touch on my hand, still smell her perfume, something exotic and intoxicating that had nothing to do with the safe, familiar sense of my world. I was a man who had never taken an unnecessary risk, never deviated from the path laid out for me since birth. But Victoria Martinez had walked into that ballroom and shown me what it might feel like to truly live. And God help me, I wanted more. 3 weeks had passed since the charity gala, and Victoria Martinez had become my beautiful obsession. Every morning I told myself I would forget her. Every night I fell asleep with her emerald eyes haunting my dreams. It started with accidental encounters that weren't accidental at all. Romano's Coffee House in Greenwich Village became our secret sanctuary, a small cafe where Manhattan's elite would never venture. I told myself these meetings meant nothing, just cultural curiosity, expanding my horizons beyond the suffocating world of old money expectations. But every lie I told myself crumbled the moment I saw her. Victoria had a way of making the ordinary extraordinary. She'd arrive at our Tuesday and Thursday rendezvous wearing paint-stained jeans and vintage band t-shirts that clung to her curves in all the right places. Her dark hair would be twisted into a messy bun, secure with what looked like a paintbrush, tendrils escaping to frame her face in ways that made my fingers itch to touch. "You're late," she said during our third meeting, not looking up from her sketch pad as I approached a corner table. "Traffic." I lied, settling into the chair across from her. Truth was, I'd circled the block 6 times, fighting with myself about whether to go in. Liar. Her eyes met mine over her drawing, and that familiar electricity crackled between us. "You were sitting in your Mercedes for 10 minutes, having a crisis of conscience." Heat flooded my face. She'd been watching. How did you? I see everything, James Wellington. She closed her sketch pad with deliberate slowness. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Everything about Victoria was a challenge wrapped in temptation. The way she stirred her coffee with languid movements that made me think of other motions entirely. How she'd lean forward when she laughed, giving me glimpses of the delicate hollow of her throat where I longed to press my lips. The casual way she'd brush her fingers against mine when passing sugar, contact so brief it could be dismissed as innocent, yet so intentional it left me burning. "Tell me about Charlotte," she said one afternoon, her voice deceptively casual. "What about her?" I deflected, uncomfortable discussing my fiancé with the woman who starred in my increasingly vivid fantasies. What does she do that makes you feel alive? The question hit me like a physical blow. Charlotte was everything a Wellington should want. Beautiful, accomplished, from the right family. She organized charity events with military precision, discussed politics with informed intelligence, and would be the perfect wife for a man in my position. But alive? When had I ever felt truly alive with Charlotte? She's suitable, I said finally, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Victoria's laugh was sharp, cutting. Suitable. How romantic. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those penetrating green eyes. When was the last time someone made you forget your own name, James? Never, I wanted to say. Not until you walked into that ballroom and turned my world upside down. Instead, I changed the subject, asking about her latest painting. Victoria's face transformed when she talked about her art, passion lighting her from within like a candle flame. She described colors the way other people describe lovers, with reverence and hunger and desperate need. "I'm working on a series about forbidden things," she said, her voice dropping to that husky register that went straight to my groin. "Desires that should remain hidden, wants that polite society pretends don't exist." Sounds dangerous. I managed, my mouth suddenly dry. The most beautiful things usually are. Her foot found mine under the table, a brief touch that sent shockwaves up my leg. "Would you like to see them?" The invitation hung between us like smoke. I knew I should decline, should pay for our coffees, and walk away from whatever spell she was weaving around me. Instead, I heard myself asking when, "Tonight, 8 o'clock. She scribbled an address on a napkin, her handwriting as graceful and unpredictable as everything else about her. "And James, don't wear the suit. You're not in Manhattan anymore." That evening, I stood outside a converted warehouse in Red Hook, wearing jeans that felt foreign against my skin and a black sweater that Charlotte had bought me, but I'd never worn. Everything about this moment was alien. The industrial neighborhood, the graffiti-covered walls, the smell of river water and possibility in the air. Victoria opened the door wearing paint-splattered overalls over a white tank top that showcased the elegant curve of her collarbone. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and she looked like every fantasy I'd never allowed myself to have. "You came," she said, and beneath her confident smile, I caught something vulnerable and uncertain. "You knew I would." "Did I?" She stepped aside to let me pass, and I caught her scent. Turpentine and jasmine, creation and seduction combined. Maybe I just hoped. Her studio was chaos and beauty merged into something breathtaking. Canvases covered every surface, some finished masterpieces, others works in progress that seemed to pulse with life. The space smelled of paint and dreams, of passion made visible in color and texture. "This is where the magic happens," Victoria said, watching me absorb her world. I stopped in front of a painting that stole my breath entirely. A woman's silhouette emerged from swirls of deep crimson and gold, her body arching what could have been dance or ecstasy or both. It was sensual without being explicit, passionate without being crude, desire distilled into pure art. "It's called Before the Fall." Victoria moved to stand beside me, close enough that her shoulder brushed my arm. "It's about that moment when you know you're about to do something that will change everything forever, but you can't stop yourself from doing it anyway." The air between us crackled with electricity. We were alone in her sanctuary, surrounded by her passion made manifest, with no society watching, no expectations to maintain. Just James and Victoria and the undeniable pull that had been growing stronger with every stolen glance. every accidental touch, every word we'd exchanged over coffee. James. My name on her lips sounded like a prayer and a curse combined. I turned to face her, and suddenly we were standing much too close. Her eyes were dark with want, pupils dilated in the studio's dim lighting. Without conscious thought, my hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb tracing the elegant line of her cheekbone. We shouldn't, I whispered, even as my other hand found her waist, fingers spreading across the small of her back. No, we shouldn't, she agreed, her hands coming up to rest against my chest, fingers curling into my sweater. You're engaged. I'm completely wrong for you. This is absolute madness. Complete madness, I murmured, leaning down until our foreheads touched, breathing the same air. Your fiancé is perfect for you. Safe, appropriate, everything a Wellington should want. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Perfectly appropriate. I agreed, my lips hovering millimeters above hers. And I'm chaos incarnate. I'm trouble wrapped in temptation. I'm everything you should run from as fast as your expensive shoes can carry you. Everything. I breathed against her mouth. The kiss, when it finally came, was nothing like the polite pecks I exchanged with Charlotte at social functions. This was hunger and need in 3 weeks of denied desire exploding between us like fireworks. Victoria's lips were soft and demanding, her tongue dancing with mine in a rhythm that promised pleasures I'd never experienced. I pressed her back against the wall, my hands tangling in the silk of her hair as she arched against me with desperate urgency. She tasted like coffee and rebellion, and everything I'd never allowed myself to crave. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her lipstick was smeared and her eyes held a heat that made my knees weak. This changes everything, I said, my voice rough with want. Everything, she agreed, her fingers still twisted in my sweater, holding me close when she should have been pushing me away. We should stop this madness, before it goes too far to turn back. But neither of us moved. We stood there in the dim light of her studio, breathing each other's air, balanced on the edge of a precipice we both knew we were going to fall from. One more, Victoria whispered, her lips swollen from our kiss. Just one more kiss, and then you go back to your perfect, appropriate life with your perfect, appropriate fiancé. But we both knew it was a beautiful lie. One more kiss became 10. 10 became touching and exploring, and discovering that the electricity between us was nothing compared to the inferno that ignited when we finally surrendered to what we both desperately wanted. When I finally left her studio near midnight, my lips swollen and my body aching with unfulfilled promises, I knew there was no going back to the man I'd been before. Victoria Martinez had marked me as surely as if she'd painted her signature across my soul in colors that would never fade. The games of seduction had begun in earnest, and we were both already losing everything we thought we wanted for something we couldn't live without. 2 weeks had passed since that first kiss in Victoria's studio, and I was losing my mind. Every stolen moment at Romano's became an exercise in exquisite torture. We would sit across from each other, discussing art and literature, while our hands accidentally brushed across a small table, sending electricity through every nerve ending in my body. Victoria was a master of temptation. She'd wear sundresses that showcased her golden skin, lean forward just enough to drive me crazy, bite her lower lip while listening to me talk in a way that made me forget every coherent thought. But she always maintained perfect control, as if she was conducting an orchestra of desire, and I was her most eager instrument. "You're distracted," she observed during one of our Thursday meetings, stirring her cappuccino with maddening slowness. "Work stress." I lied, though the only stress consuming me was the need to pull her into my arms and finish what we'd started in her studio. Liar. Her emerald eyes sparkled with mischief. "You've been thinking about kissing me again." The direct statement hit me like lightning. Victoria never played coy games or spoken code. Her honesty was as intoxicating as her beauty. Every minute of every day, I admitted, surprising myself of my candor. Her breath caught, and for a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked. "James, I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about what would feel like to touch every inch of your skin." The words poured out like water through a broken dam. "This is destroying me, Victoria." She reached across the table, her fingers intertwining with mine. The simple touch sent fire racing through my veins. Then maybe it's time we stop pretending this is just coffee and conversation. What are you suggesting? A slow, seductive smile curved her lips. I know a place. Somewhere we can be alone, without the rest of the world watching. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that made my pulse race. Tomorrow night, there's a cottage upstate that belongs to a friend. She's in Europe for the month. Victoria, I don't think I can trust myself to be alone with you. Good, she said, her thumb tracing circles on my knuckles. Because I don't want you to trust yourself. I want you to let go of every rule you've ever followed and just feel. That night, I called Charlotte to cancel our dinner plans, claiming a client emergency. The lie came so easily now, sliding off my tongue like silk. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, and the most terrifying part was that I liked who I was becoming when I was with Victoria. The cottage was a 2-hour drive north of the city, nestled beside a private lake surrounded by towering pine trees. It was the kind of place where secrets were born and boundaries dissolved under starlight. I arrived first, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door with the key Victoria had given me. The interior was rustic but elegant. Exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace, windows that offered breathtaking views of the water. I built a fire more for something to do with my nervous energy than for warmth, though the October evening carried a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. When Victoria's car pulled into the gravel driveway, my heart began pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Through the window, I watched her gather a small overnight bag and a bottle of wine, moving with that unconscious grace that had first captured my attention at the charity gala. She wore a flowing black dress that caught the moonlight, her hair loose and wild around her shoulders. When she knocked on the door, I took a deep breath, knowing that opening it would change everything forever. "Hello, James," she said simply, but her eyes held promises that made my mouth go dry. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" She stepped inside, setting down her bag and wine before turning to face me. We've been dancing around this for weeks. Tonight, we finished the dance. The fire crackled behind us, casting dancing shadows on the walls. We stood 3 feet apart, both of us trembling with anticipation and terror. This was the moment of no return, and we both knew it. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, giving her one last chance to retreat to safety. "I've never been sure of anything in my life," she whispered, moving closer. "But I've also never wanted anything more." Her hands found in front of my shirt, fingers working the buttons with deliberate slowness. Each touch of her skin against mine felt like a brand, marking me as hers in ways that went beyond the physical. "You're shaking," she observed softly. "So are you." She laughed, a sound breathless with nerves and desire. I've imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it's here, I cupped her face in my hands, tilting her head back to meet my gaze. "We can stop. We can go back to just coffee and conversation." "Can we?" Her eyes searched mine. "Because I don't think I can pretend anymore that what I feel for you is casual friendship. What do you feel for me, Victoria?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Her hand stilled on my chest, and I saw vulnerability flicker across her features. "I feel like I'm falling," she whispered. "Like I've been standing on the edge of a cliff my whole life, and you're the wind that's finally going to push me over." I kissed her then, pouring weeks of longing and denial into the connection of our lips. This kiss was different from our first. Deeper, more desperate, flavored with the knowledge that we had all night and no one to interrupt us. Victoria's hands resumed their work on my shirt, pushing it off my shoulders and letting it fall to the floor. Her fingertips traced the muscles of my chest and abdomen with artistic appreciation, as if she was memorizing every contour for future painting. "You're beautiful," she murmured against my neck, her lips trailing fire along my collarbone. I laughed despite the heat coursing through my veins. "Men aren't supposed to be beautiful." "You are." She pulled back to look at me, her eyes dark with desire. "You're beautiful and forbidden and everything I should stay away from." My hands found the zipper of her dress, sliding it down with agonizing slowness. The fabric pulled at her feet, like black water, revealing curves that haunted my dreams and skin that glowed golden in the firelight. She was perfect. Absolutely, devastatingly perfect. Now who's beautiful? I breathed, my hand spanning her waist, thumbs tracing the underside of her ribs. We moved together toward the bedroom as if choreographed, stopping every few steps to kiss and touch and explore. By the time we reached the bed, we were both breathing hard, our skin flushed with arousal and anticipation. "Are you sure?" I asked one more time, even as my body screamed for her touch. "Make love to me, James," she whispered, pulling me down onto the soft mattress. "Make me forget everything except how it feels to be yours." What happened next was nothing like the mechanical encounters I'd shared with Charlotte or the few other women in my carefully controlled past. This was worship and passion, and two souls recognizing their perfect match. Every touch was electric, every kiss a revelation, every whispered endearment a promise we had no right to make but couldn't stop ourselves from offering. Victoria was responsive and demanding, guiding my hands and lips to places that made her arch and gasp and call my name like a prayer. I learned the geography of her body with reverent attention, discovering that she was ticklish just below her ribs, that kissing her neck made her breath hitch, that she had a small scar on her shoulder from a childhood accident that she would tell me about later. When we finally joined together, moving in ancient rhythm beside the dying fire, it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been but had been searching for my entire life. Victoria's eyes never left mine, and in their depths I saw my own soul reflected back at me. Changed forever. Afterward, we lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, her head on my chest, my fingers combing through her hair. The cottage was quiet except for the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore and our gradually slowing heartbeats. "I love you," Victoria whispered against my skin, her voice so soft I almost missed it. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd never said those words to Charlotte, despite our engagement. I'd never felt for anyone what I felt for the woman in my arms. "I love you too," I replied, and felt something fundamental shift in the universe. "God help me, Victoria. I love you more than I've ever loved anything." She lifted her head to look at me, tears shining in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" It was a question I'd been avoiding, the reality I'd been denying. I was engaged to another woman. My entire life was built on expectations and obligations that didn't include this perfect, impossible love. "I don't know," I admitted, pulling her closer. "But I can't give this up. I can't give you up. Even if it destroys everything you've worked for." I thought about my career, my family's expectations, the merger my marriage to Charlotte would facilitate. Then I looked into Victoria's eyes and felt my carefully constructed world crumble like sand castles before the tide. Even then, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being, we made love again as dawn painted the sky pink and gold, sealing promises we weren't sure we could keep but couldn't stop ourselves from making. In that cottage beside the lake, with Victoria in my arms and forever stretching before us like an impossible dream, I finally understood what it meant to be truly alive. But even in that moment of perfect happiness, I could feel the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. 3 months of stolen paradise had transformed me into a masterful liar. I crafted elaborate stories about client meetings, business dinners, and weekend conferences that existed only to create pockets of time where Victoria and I could disappear into our secret world. Each deception felt like a small death, but the alternative, living without her touch, her laughter, her love, was unthinkable. Our affair had settled into a dangerous rhythm that both sustained and tormented me. Monday through Wednesday belonged to my other life, Charlotte, family obligations, the suffocating expectations of Manhattan society. But Thursday through Sunday were ours, sacred hours when James Wellington ceased to exist, and I became simply the man who loved Victoria Martinez with desperate, consuming intensity. We developed an intricate system of communication that would have impressed Cold War spies. Victoria would call my direct office line at precisely 2:47 p.m. every Tuesday, letting it ring twice before hanging up, our signal that the coast was clear for the weekend. I would respond by leaving a white orchid at the florist on 82nd Street, where she would collect along with a note detailing our next rendezvous. The cottage upstate became our sanctuary, but we also discovered other hiding places throughout the city. A small hotel in the village where the desk clerk had learned not to ask questions. A friend's empty penthouse while they vacationed in the Hamptons. Once, memorably, Victoria's studio after hours, where we made love on a canvas-covered floor while rain drummed against the skylights. "You're becoming quite the criminal mastermind," Victoria observed one Thursday evening as we lay tangled in silk sheets at the village hotel. Her finger traced lazy patterns across my chest, and I could feel her smile against my shoulder. "Is that what we are? Criminals?" "The worst kind," she murmured, pressing a kiss to my collarbone. "We're stealing time that doesn't belong to us, taking moments that should go to other people." The guilt was always there, lurking at the edges of our happiness like shadows at sunset. Charlotte had begun asking pointed questions about my frequent absences, her blue eyes holding suspicions she was too well-bred to voice directly. My mother had made several pointed comments about pre-wedding stress and the importance of commitment to family duty. But when Victoria was in my arms, when her skin was warm against mine and her breath whispered my name like a prayer, the rest of the world faded to irrelevance. She had awakened something in me that I hadn't even known was sleeping, a capacity for passion that bordered on madness, a need that transcended every rational thought. "I bought us another week," I told her during one of our clandestine meetings, referring to a fictional business trip to Chicago that would give us uninterrupted time together. How many lies can one man tell before his soul turns black? Victoria asked, but she was smiling as she said it, her eyes dancing with mischief and desire. "I'd tell 1,000 lies for one more night with you," I replied, and meant every word. Our weekends had become exercises in concentrated living. We would drive to Cottage Friday evening, stopping at small-town diners where no one knew our names, where I could hold her hand across red vinyl booths, and she could feed me bites of pie like we were ordinary lovers instead of conspirators in the crime of forbidden love. At the cottage, we created our own world with its own rules. I would cook for her, simple meals that tasted like ambrosia when eaten by candlelight with the woman I loved. Victoria would paint while I read legal briefs, both of us naked and comfortable in our shared sanctuary. We talked about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears with the desperate honesty of people who knew their time was stolen and therefore infinitely precious. "Tell me something no one else knows," Victoria said one Saturday morning as we lay in bed, watching sunrise paint the lake gold and crimson. "I wanted to be a musician once," I admitted, surprised by my own confession. "Before law school, before family expectations took over. I used to play piano, compose little pieces that no one ever heard." "Play for me," she demanded, sitting up with sudden enthusiasm. "There's no piano here." "Then hum something. Sing it." Her eyes were bright with curiosity and love. "I want to know every secret James Wellington, the man you hide from the world." So I hummed a melody I'd written in college, something melancholy and hopeful that had captured my mood during those uncertain years. Victoria listened with rapt attention, her head tilted like a bird hearing a new song. "It's beautiful," she whispered when I finished. "Sad but beautiful like you. I'm not sad when I'm with you." "No," she agreed, leaning down to kiss me softly. "When you're with me, you're magnificent." The physical connection between us remained electric, intensifying rather than diminishing with familiarity. Victoria was an adventurous lover who pushed me beyond every boundary I'd ever maintained. She taught me that pleasure could be both gentle and fierce, that making love could be both reverent worship and wild claiming. "I want to memorize every inch of you," she would whisper against my skin, her lips and tongue mapping territories that no one else had ever explored with such thoroughness. "I want to know your body better than my own." We made love in the cottage's living room with firelight dancing across our intertwined bodies, in the kitchen while dinner burned forgotten on the stove. Once, memorably, in the lake itself during a warm September evening, the water caressing our joined bodies, while stars reflected around us like scattered diamonds. "This is what paradise feels like," Victoria said that night as we floated together in the dark water, her legs wrapped around my waist, her hair streaming around us like liquid silk. "Then I never want to leave," I replied, and felt her shiver despite the warm water. But Monday mornings always came, brutal in their normalcy. I would kiss Victoria goodbye in some anonymous parking lot, both of us pretending it was just "see you later," instead of another small death. Then I would drive back to Manhattan, to my penthouse apartment that felt like a mausoleum, to Charlotte, who greeted me with increasing coolness, to a life that no longer fit me like clothes cut for someone else's body. The lies grew more elaborate as our love deepened. I invented colleagues who didn't exist, created detailed itineraries for trips I never took, even went so far as to book actual hotel rooms in other cities just to have receipts that would support my deceptions. Every falsehood felt like another brick in a wall that was separating me from everything I was supposed to be. "You're different," Charlotte observed one evening as we attended yet another society function. "Distant. Sometimes I look at you, and it's like you're not really here." She wasn't wrong. Even when my body was present at charity galas and family dinners, my mind was always elsewhere, reliving Victoria's laugh, anticipating her next touch, counting the hours until we could be together again. Wedding stress. I said, the excuse that had become my standard deflection. Once everything is settled, I'll be back to normal. But we both knew that wasn't true. The man Charlotte had agreed to marry was disappearing piece by piece, being replaced by someone who understood passion, who had tasted real love and could no longer pretend satisfaction with its pale imitation. The most dangerous moments came when both worlds threatened to collide. Victoria and I developed elaborate protocols for these situations, codes we could text if emergency exits were needed, fake identities we could assume a question by the wrong people, alibis we could activate with a single phone call. Once, Charlotte suggested we visit a gallery in Soho on the same weekend Victoria was having a showing there. My heart stopped as I imagined the two women meeting again. Imagine Charlotte seeing the way I looked at Victoria, the way my entire being came alive in her presence. "I'm not feeling well," I lied, feigning stomach trouble. "Perhaps another time." Charlotte was disappointed, but not suspicious. Not yet, but I could see questions building in her eyes, feel the foundation of our relationship shifting, as she sensed truths I wasn't ready to reveal. The weight of deception was crushing me slowly, but the alternative, losing Victoria, was unbearable. So I continued to live two lives with the skill of professional actor, switching between roles so completely that sometimes I wonder which version was real. The answer came every Thursday when Victoria would appear at whatever rendezvous point we'd arranged, her smile bright enough to chase away every shadow in my carefully compartmentalized existence. In her arms, I wasn't James Wellington, heir to expectations and prisoner of propriety. I was simply a man in love, finally understanding what it meant to be fully alive. But even in our moments of greatest happiness, I could feel time running out. Lies have their own gravity, growing heavier with each repetition until they threaten to crush everything beneath their weight. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that eventually all stolen time must be returned. The first crack in our perfect world appeared on a gray November morning when my mother arrived at my office unannounced, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Margaret Wellington had perfected the art of aristocratic displeasure over 6 decades, and I recognized the storm brewing in her steel blue eyes the moment she swept through my door. "We need to talk," she announced, settling into the leather chair across from my desk with a regal bearing that had intimidated Manhattan society for decades. "About your recent absences from family obligations." My blood turned to ice water. "Mother, I've been busy with the Morrison case. You know how demanding." "The Morrison case concluded 3 weeks ago, James." Her voice could have frozen champagne. "Yet you missed your cousin's engagement party last Saturday, claiming urgent client meetings. You've canceled 2 family dinners this month, and Charlotte's mother called me yesterday asking if you're having second thoughts about the wedding." Every lie I carefully constructed began to feel gossamer thin under her withering stare. Margaret Wellington hadn't built a social empire by being naive or easily fooled. She could detect deception the way sharks sense blood in water. "I'm not having second thoughts," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Pre-wedding stress, nothing more." James Arthur Wellington. She used my full name like a weapon. "I've known you for 32 years. You've never been stressed about anything in your life. You plan, you execute, you succeed. This distraction is something else entirely." The word distraction hit me like a slap. Victoria wasn't distraction. She was the sun around which my entire existence now revolved. But I could hardly explain that to my mother, who viewed love as a luxury the wealthy couldn't afford. Perhaps you're right, I conceded, hoping to deflect her suspicions. Maybe I should focus more on what's important. What's important? Margaret said, rising to pace behind my chair like a general planning a campaign, is the merger between Wellington Industries and Whitmore Holdings. This marriage isn't just about you and Charlotte. It's about securing our family's position for the next generation. I'd heard this lecture countless times, but it had never felt quite so much like a noose tightening around my throat. Of course, the family legacy. Exactly. She stopped pacing, fixing me with a stare that could have melted steel, which is why I've moved the engagement announcement up to next Friday. Society page of the Times. Formal reception at the club. It's time to make this official before any complications arise. The world tilted sideways. Next Friday was supposed to be a long weekend with Victoria at the cottage for precious days of freedom that I've been anticipating for weeks. More importantly, a formal announcement would make everything real in a way that would be nearly impossible to undo. That seems rushed. I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Nonsense. You've been engaged for 2 years. It's time to stop playing house and start building a future. Margaret gathered her purse with brisk efficiency. I've already spoken with the Times. The announcement will run Sunday morning, with the reception Friday evening. Attendance is mandatory, not optional. After she left, I sat in my office staring at the phone for 20 minutes before finding the courage to call Victoria. Her number rang 4 times before a warm, familiar voice answered. Hey, stranger. I was just thinking about you. We need to talk. Tonight, can you meet me? Something in my tone must have alarmed her, because her voice immediately grew serious. What's wrong? Everything. I'll explain when I see you. The usual place, 8 o'clock. The usual place was a small wine bar in a village that catered to artists and writers, people who valued privacy and minded their own business. Victoria was already there when I arrived, sitting in our corner booth wearing a concerned expression that made my chest ache with love and guilt. You look like someone died, she said as I slid in across from her. Maybe someone did. I told her about my mother's visit, about the accelerated engagement announcement, about the trap that was closing around us with metallic finality. Victoria listened in silence, her face growing paler with each word. So it's real now, she said finally. No more pretending this is just a postponed wedding that might not happen. Victoria, No. She held up a hand, stopping my words. Let me process this. Next Friday, you're going to stand in front of New York society and formally announce your engagement to another woman. The Times will print it. Your families will celebrate. And then what happens to us? It was a question I'd been avoiding, the reality I'd refused to confront. I don't know. You don't know. Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. Well, I do. We become even more of a secret than we already are. Stolen hours become stolen minutes. This guilt that's already eating you alive gets worse until you can't stand to look at yourself in the mirror. She wasn't wrong, and we both knew it. The weight of our deception had been growing heavier with each passing week. I'd started having nightmares about Charlotte discovering us, about my career imploding, about losing everything I'd worked for. But the thought of losing Victoria was infinitely worse. Run away with me, I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could stop them. Victoria's eyes widened. What? Run away with me. Tonight, we'll go somewhere they can't find us. Start over, build something real. James, you're not thinking clearly. You can't just disappear. You have responsibilities, a career, a life. I have nothing without you. The words came out louder than intended, causing several patrons to glance our way. I lowered my voice, leaning across the table desperately. Don't you understand? None of it means anything if I can't be with you. Victoria reached across the table, her fingers intertwining with mine. And what happens in 6 months when the money runs out, when reality sets in, when you realize what you've given up for me? I'll never regret choosing you. Won't you? Her green eyes searched my face with painful intensity. When you can't practice law because the scandal has destroyed your reputation, when your family disowns you, when you're working some dead-end job because the Wellington name has become poison in Manhattan, I wanted to argue, to tell her that love would be enough, that we could survive anything together. But the practical part of my brain, the part trained by years of legal analysis, knew she was right. We were trapped by circumstances as surely as if we were locked in separate prisons. So what are you saying? That we should end this. I'm saying that maybe we should have ended it before it began. Tears were gathering in her eyes, making them shine like emeralds underwater. I knew this day would come. I hoped maybe we'd have more time. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of desperate passion and growing despair. We met whenever possible, making love with the fierce urgency of people who knew their world was ending. Every kiss tasted like goodbye. Every touch carried the weight of finality. The engagement announcement ran in the Sunday Times exactly as my mother had planned. A formal photograph of Charlotte and me, looking every inch the perfect couple, beneath a headline that made our union sound like a corporate merger disguised as romance. Victoria called me that morning, her voice hollow with pain. "You look very handsome in your photograph," she said. "Victoria, she's beautiful, your fiancée. You make a lovely couple. Very suitable." The word was a knife twisting in my chest. Please don't do this. Do what? Acknowledge reality? Accept that this fairy tale was always going to end badly. I could hear her crying, and it took every ounce of strength I possessed not to abandon everything and run to her. This doesn't change how I feel about you, doesn't it? Because it changes everything for me. Seeing it in print, seeing you two together looking so perfect and right, it makes me realize what I really am in this equation. You're the woman I love. I'm the other woman, James. The dirty little secret. The mistake you'll look back on someday and wonder how you could have been so stupid. That's not true, isn't it? When you're living in your perfect penthouse with your perfect wife, hosting perfect dinner parties for your perfect friends, will you even remember the artist from Queens who almost derailed your perfect life? Her words cut deeper than any blade, not because they were cruel, but because somewhere in the darkest corner of my heart, I feared they might be true. Would I remember this passion when I was 60? Would these stolen moments matter when I was gray and respectable and safely contained within the boundaries of my predetermined existence? I could never forget you, I whispered. But you'll try, she said, and the certainty in her voice broke something fundamental inside me. Because forgetting will hurt less than remembering. The formal engagement party was exactly as excruciating as I'd anticipated. Charlotte glowed with happiness as she showed off her ring to endless streams of well-wishers. My mother presided over festivities like a victorious general, her smile triumphant as she watched her plans fall perfectly into place. I played my part with the skill of a trained actor, accepting congratulations and toasts while my heart bled invisibly. Every smile felt like betrayal. Every thank you tasted like poison on my tongue. "You seem subdued tonight," Charlotte observed during a quiet moment between toasts. "This should be one of the happiest nights of our lives." Just overwhelmed by it all. I lied. The deception now as natural as breathing. It's a big step. "The biggest," she agreed, squeezing my hand with genuine affection. "I'm so proud to be your fiancé, James. We're going to be so happy together." Looking into her trusting blue eyes, I felt the full weight of my betrayal crash down on me. Charlotte wasn't evil or cruel. She was simply a woman who loved me and believed I loved her in return. She deserved better than a man whose heart belonged entirely to someone else. But I was too much of a coward to give her that better. Too selfish to walk away from the life that had been planned for me since birth. Too weak to choose love over security, passion over propriety. Later that night, as I stood alone in my penthouse staring out at the city lights, I called Victoria's number. It went straight to voicemail. Her voice warm and inviting, asking me to leave a message. "I love you," I said to the recording. "I know everything is complicated and impossible, but I love you. That's not going to change, no matter what the newspapers say or what parties I attend. You're not a mistake, Victoria. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." She never called back. The chains of expectation were tightening around me with each passing day, but the one that bound my heart to Victoria Martinez remained unbreakable, even as I began to understand that loving her might destroy us both. The end of our secret world came not with dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet click of a hotel room door and my mother's voice cutting through the afternoon silence like a blade through silk. Well, this explains everything. Victoria and I had been lost in each other's arms at the plaza, stealing precious hours on what I thought was a safe Tuesday afternoon. Charlotte was at her book club. My calendar showed client meetings until evening, and we'd been careful, so incredibly careful, for 6 months of clandestine love. But Margaret Wellington hadn't built a social empire by leaving anything to chance. Later, I would learn about the private investigator, the photographs, the meticulous documentation of my every lie. In that moment, though, there was only the devastating sight of my mother standing in the doorway, her face a mask of cold fury, while Victoria scrambled to cover herself with hotel sheets. "Mother," the word came out as a strangled whisper. How did I find you?" Her laugh could have shattered crystal. "James, darling, did you really think I wouldn't notice that my son had been replaced by some lovesick fool? The missed dinners, the canceled obligations, the glazed look in your eyes whenever anyone mentioned your wedding." I moved instinctively to shield Victoria, pulling on my pants while she sat frozen behind me, clutching the sheet to her chest like armor that could protect her from what was coming. "James, who is this woman?" my mother continued, her voice dropping to that dangerous register that had terrorized subordinates for decades. Though I suspect I already know. "Miss Martinez, isn't it? The little artist from the charity gala." Victoria found her voice then, and I felt a surge of pride at its steadiness despite the circumstances. "Mrs. Wellington, I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." "Oh, my dear girl, there are no circumstances under which I would wish to meet my son's whore." The word hit the air like a slap. Victoria flinched as if she'd been physically struck, and something savage and protective roared to life in my chest. "Don't you dare speak to her that way," I snarled, stepping forward. Victoria is not. Victoria is exactly what I said she is." My mother's voice remained perfectly controlled, each word precisely enunciated. A fortune-hunting little nobody who saw an opportunity to climb above her station and seized it. How much is she asking for, James? How much to disappear quietly? "You don't know anything about her," I said, my hands clenching into fists. "Victoria would never. Wouldn't she?" Margaret's smile was pure poison. "Miss Martinez, what exactly do you think happens now? Do you imagine my son will abandon his family, his career, his entire future for a few months of adequate sex?" I watched Victoria's face crumble, saw the exact moment when my mother's words found their target. "Stop it," I demanded. "Just stop. The truth is rarely pleasant, darling." My mother began pacing the small hotel room, like a predator circling wounded prey. "But let me make the situation crystal clear. In 3 days, the Whitmore family is announcing the date for your wedding, June 15th at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The invitations are already being printed. The reception is booked at the Plaza Grand Ballroom." The room spun around me. 3 days? But we haven't because you've been too busy playing house with your little hobby here. She gestured dismissively at Victoria, who had gone completely still. "But that ends today. This dalliance is over." "No." The word came out stronger than I felt. "I won't marry Charlotte. I can't. You can and you will." My mother's massive control finally slipped, revealing the steel underneath. "Because if you don't, I will personally ensure that Miss Martinez here never works in the city again. Her art, her reputation, her future, all of it will be destroyed so thoroughly that no gallery from Manhattan to Los Angeles will even take her phone calls." Victoria spoke for the first time since the initial greeting, her voice barely above a whisper. "You would do that?" "My dear, I would do much worse than that to protect my family." Margaret's smile returned, cold and triumphant. "I would make you disappear so completely that people would question whether you ever existed at all." The threat hung in the air like smoke. I knew my mother well enough to understand that she wasn't bluffing. The Wellington name carried enough weight to crush someone like Victoria without leaving fingerprints. One word from Margaret Wellington to the right people, and every door in Victoria's world would slam shut. There has to be another way, I said desperately. Some compromise. The only compromise, my mother interrupted, is how quickly Miss Martinez removes herself from your life. She can disappear quietly and maintain what little dignity she has left, or she can fight this and discover exactly how ruthless I can be when protecting what's mine. I looked at Victoria, seeing my own despair reflected in her green eyes. We both understood the impossible position we'd been placed in. Any choice that ended with us together would destroy her completely, and I couldn't live with being the instrument of her annihilation. Victoria, I started, but she shook her head. I need to get dressed, she said quietly. Could you both please leave? Of course. My mother moved toward the door with brisk efficiency. James, you have 5 minutes to collect yourself and meet me in the lobby. We have damage control to discuss. After she left, I turned to Victoria, who was already pulling on her clothes with mechanical movements. The life had drained from her face, leaving her looking like a beautiful ghost of the woman I loved. We'll figure this out, I said, reaching for her. There has to be a way. Don't. She stepped back, avoiding my touch. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I love you. That doesn't change because my mother found out, doesn't it? Victoria's laugh was broken glass, because everything else just changed. Your wedding date, your future, the price of being with me. Can you honestly tell me you're prepared to watch her destroy my life piece by piece? I wanted to say yes, wanted to claim that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle, but the words died in my throat because we both knew the answer. I couldn't stand by and watch Victoria's dreams turn to ash just to satisfy my own selfish desires. That's what I thought, she said, reading my silence correctly. You're not a selfish man, James. It's one of the things I love most about you, but it's also why we both know how this has to end. Victoria, please. She was right about one thing. Victoria's voice was growing stronger, more resolved. I am exactly what she said I am. A nobody from Queens who reached too high and got burned for it. That's not true. Isn't it? Look around, James. Look at where we are, what we're doing. Sneaking around in hotel rooms, living on stolen moments, building a relationship on lies and deception. That's not love. That's obsession dressed up in prettier words. Each word was a knife in my chest, but I could see the determination building in her eyes. Victoria was preparing to walk away, to sacrifice our love on the altar of practicality and self-preservation. I won't let her destroy you, I said. Then let me go. She finished dressing and picked up her purse, moving toward the door with devastating finality. Let me disappear quietly, with whatever dignity I have left. Victoria, wait. She turned back at the door, and for a moment, the mask slipped and I saw the raw agony underneath. I love you, James Wellington. I will love you until the day I die. But sometimes love means knowing when to let go. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. I stood alone in that hotel room for what felt like hours, surrounded by the lingering scent of her perfume and the wreckage of everything I'd ever wanted. Eventually, my mother's impatient knocking forced me to pull myself together enough to face the lobby, where she waited with the look of someone who had successfully completed an unpleasant but necessary task. It's for the best, she said as we walked toward the exit. You'll see that eventually. Will I? You're a Wellington, James. We don't destroy ourselves for momentary passions. We endure. We build. We secure the future for generations to come. The next 3 days passed in a blur of wedding preparations and damage control. Charlotte, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded, threw herself into planning with renewed enthusiasm. The wedding date announcement ran in all the right publications, complete with quotes about our deepening love and shared commitment to tradition. I played my part perfectly, as I'd been trained to do since childhood. But inside, I was dying by degrees, counting every hour that passed without Victoria's voice, her touch, her presence, my increasingly empty world. The scandal never became public, of course. My mother was too skilled for that. But in the drawing rooms and private clubs where Manhattan's elite gathered, whispers began to circulate. Speculation about the Wellington heir's mysterious behavior. Knowing glances exchanged when my name was mentioned. The subtle social destruction that preceded complete ruin. Victoria, true to her word, had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Her studio stood empty, her phone disconnected, her friends claiming ignorance of her whereabouts. My mother's work was thorough and devastating in its efficiency. But late at night, alone in my penthouse with the city sprawling below me, I would remember the weight of Victoria's body against mine, the sound of her laughter, the way she'd looked at me as if I was someone worth loving. And I would understand that some things once lost could never be recovered, no matter how perfect a life that replaced them appeared to be. The chains of expectation had finally closed completely, but they felt more like shackles binding me to a future that stretched ahead like an elegant prison sentence, beautiful and suffocating and utterly without the one thing that had ever made me feel truly alive. The weeks following Victoria's disappearance felt like living in a beautifully appointed tomb. Every morning, I woke hoping the previous day had been a nightmare, only to find myself alone in silk sheets that smelled of nothing but expensive detergent. No trace of jasmine and turpentine, no whispered promises, no emerald eyes to greet the dawn. Charlotte threw herself into wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of a general planning a victorious campaign. Our dining room table disappeared beneath fabric samples, flower arrangements, and guest lists that read like a who's who of Manhattan society. She would chatter excitedly about centerpieces and menu selections while I nodded at appropriate intervals, my mind always elsewhere, searching crowds for dark hair that cascaded like silk, listening for laughter that could light up the darkest corners of my soul. James, are you even listening to me? Charlotte's voice cut through my reverie during what felt like our 100th discussion about wedding cake flavors. Of course, the vanilla sounds perfect. She frowned, studying my face with growing concern. I was talking about the string quartet for the ceremony. We haven't discussed cake yet today. Heat flushed my cheeks. Sorry, work has been demanding. Work. Charlotte set down her wedding planning binder with deliberate care. James, we need to talk. Really talk. About what's been happening to you these past few months. My heart stopped. Had she discovered something? Had my mother's careful damage control missed some crucial detail? I don't know what you mean. You're not yourself. Charlotte's blue eyes, always so trusting, now held flickers of doubt and hurt. You're distant, distracted, like your mind is always somewhere else. Sometimes when you look at me, it's like you're seeing a stranger. She wasn't wrong. Ever since Victoria had walked out of that hotel room, Charlotte had become a beautiful ghost haunting the edges of my consciousness. I went through the motions of our relationship, dinner dates, family obligations, social functions, but my heart remained locked in a place she could never reach. Pre-wedding nerves, I said, the lie feeling more hollow each time I used it. Everything will be fine once we're married. Will it? Charlotte stood up, pacing to the window overlooking Central Park. Because I'm starting to wonder if you actually want to marry me at all. The question hung in the air like smoke. How could I tell her that I discovered what real love felt like? How could I explain that every kiss we shared tasted like betrayal? Every touch felt like sacrilege against a memory of hands that had known every inch of my soul. Of course I want to marry you, I said, but the words came out mechanical, rehearsed. Do you love me, James? The simple question hit me like a physical blow. Charlotte deserved honesty, deserved a man who could look into her eyes and feel his heart race with anticipation. Instead, she had me, a hollow shell of a man going through the motions of a life that no longer fit. You're going to be my wife, I said, which wasn't an answer at all. That's not what I asked. Charlotte turned from the window, her face pale but determined. I asked if you loved me. Not duty, not expectation. Not because our families think we're perfect together. Do you, James Wellington, love me, Charlotte Whitmore? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I opened my mouth to deliver the expected response, to offer the comfortable lie that would smooth over this uncomfortable moment. But Victoria's face flashed in my memory. The way she demanded honesty even when it hurt. The way she refused to accept anything less than authentic emotion. I care about you deeply. I said finally, I respect you. I admire you. I want you to be happy. But you don't love me. It wasn't a question this time. Charlotte, do you love someone else? The question landed like lightning, illuminating truths I've been trying desperately to hide. I could see in Charlotte's eyes that she already knew the answer, had perhaps known for weeks but been too afraid to voice her suspicions. It doesn't matter, I said quietly. I'm going to marry you. It's the only thing that matters. Charlotte's composure finally cracked, revealing the hurt and anger she'd been bottling up. God, James, how can you be so cruel? How can you stand there and plan to marry me while your heart belongs to someone else? Because I don't have a choice. The words exploded out of me with volcanic force. Because sometimes life doesn't care what your heart wants. Because sometimes duty and obligation and family expectations matter more than personal happiness. Charlotte stared at me in shock, seeing perhaps for the first time the man I'd become, bitter, trapped, slowly suffocating under the weight of everyone else's dreams of my future. There's always a choice, James. Always. No, there isn't. I slumped into my chair, suddenly feeling decades older than my 32 years. Not for people like us. Not when entire families' futures depend on the decisions we make. So you're going to sacrifice both our happiness for the sake of a business merger disguised as marriage? When she put it like that, it sounded even more horrible than it felt. The Wellington name. The Wellington name will survive if you marry for love instead of logistics. Charlotte sat down across from me, her voice gentling. James, I've known you since we were children. I've watched you follow every rule, meet every expectation, be the perfect son and heir your parents wanted. But I've never seen you truly happy until... She trailed off, but I knew what she was thinking. Until recently. Until those months when I've been living a double life, stealing happiness in stolen moments with a woman who made me feel alive. Who is she? Charlotte asked softly. It doesn't matter. She's gone. Gone. I told her everything then, not the intimate details, but the essential truth about meeting Victoria at the charity gala, about the months of secret meetings, about my mother's discovery, and the brutal ultimatum that had torn us apart. Charlotte listened without interruption, her face cycling through hurt, anger, and finally something that looked like understanding. You let her go, she said when I finished. You chose duty over love. I chose her safety over my happiness. My mother would have destroyed her. And now you're planning to destroy us both by going through with this wedding. The accusation hit home because it was true. In trying to protect everyone, I was ensuring that no one would be happy. Charlotte deserved a husband who adored her, not one who saw her as a beautiful prison guard. Victoria deserved a man brave enough to fight for their love, not one who folded at the first sign of real opposition. What do you want me to do? I asked, genuinely curious about her answer. I want you to be brave enough to choose happiness. For both of us. And if I can't, if I'm too much of a coward to disappoint everyone who's counting on this marriage. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize features she might never see again. Then I'll make the choice for both of us, she said finally. What do you mean? I mean I won't marry a man who's in love with another woman. I have more self-respect than that, even if you don't have enough courage to admit the truth publicly. My blood turned to ice water. Charlotte, you can't be serious. The invitations are already sent. The deposits are paid. Both our families will survive a broken engagement better than they'll survive a miserable marriage. She stood up, smoothing down her skirt with hands that only trembled slightly. I'm going to tell my parents tonight. I suggest you do the same. This will cause a scandal. The social implications. Let me worry about the social implications of my own life. James. Charlotte's voice held a strength I'd never heard before. I'd rather be known as the woman who was brave enough to walk away than the wife who was too weak to demand real love. She moved toward the door, then turned back one final time. For what it's worth, I hope you find her again. I hope you find the courage to fight for what makes you happy instead of what makes everyone else comfortable. After Charlotte left, I sat alone in my apartment as the sun set over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded me painfully of Victoria's favorite colors. My phone had been ringing constantly. My mother, Charlotte's parents, various family members who'd already heard about the broken engagement to the Manhattan Gossip Network. I ignored them all, lost in memories of emerald eyes and paint-stained fingers, of laughter that could chase away any shadow, of a love so pure and consuming that it spoiled me for any pale imitation. Charlotte was right. There was always a choice. I'd been hiding behind duty and family expectations because making the brave choice meant risking everything I'd ever known for something I might not be able to recover. But as I sat there surrounded by the wreckage of my carefully planned future, I realized that some things were worth any risk. Some loves were worth burning down entire worlds to protect. The question was whether I had the courage to choose fire over ice, passion over propriety, love over everything else that had defined me since birth. Outside my window, the city lights were beginning to twinkle like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, Victoria was building a new life without me, proudly convincing herself that what we'd shared had been nothing more than a beautiful mistake. I picked up my phone and dialed the private investigator my family had used for years. If I was going to make an impossible choice, I needed to know that the woman I was choosing still existed to be found. The chains of expectation had been broken by someone braver than I was. Now it was time to discover whether I had the strength to walk away from their wreckage and build something new from the ashes. Finding Victoria took 3 agonizing weeks and every favor I could call in from my legal network. The private investigator's report was thorough but devastating. She had vanished from New York as completely as if she'd never existed, leaving behind only a forwarding address for a small coastal town in Northern California, where she'd apparently started over under her mother's maiden name. My hand shook as I held the photograph the investigator had managed to capture. Victoria walking along a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, her dark hair longer now, whipping in the salt wind. Even in that grainy surveillance image, she looked beautiful but heartbreakingly different, thinner, somehow diminished, as if the vibrant woman I'd fallen in love would have been replaced by a careful shadow of herself. I boarded the next flight to San Francisco without telling anyone where I was going. My mother had been apoplectic about Charlotte's broken engagement, alternating between rage at my selfish destruction of family honor and icy disappointment in my failure to handle a simple society girl. The scandal had been contained but not eliminated. Whispers followed me through every social function. Speculation about what had really caused Manhattan's engagement of the decade to implode so spectacularly. None of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was a woman living in exile 3,000 miles away. The woman I should have fought for 6 months ago, instead of letting my mother's threats drive her away. Mendocino was exactly the kind of place Victoria would choose for healing. A small artist community perched on dramatic cliffs where ocean waves crashed endlessly against weathered rocks. I found her cottage easily enough, a small blue house with paint-splattered windows that faced the endless expanse of the Pacific. For 20 minutes, I sat in my rental car outside her gate, gathering courage I should have found months earlier. Through the window, I could see easels and canvases, evidence that she was still painting despite everything that had happened. The sight gave me hope that the creative fire I'd fallen in love with hadn't been completely extinguished. Victoria answered the door wearing paint-stained overalls and a look of stunned disbelief that quickly transformed into something resembling panic. "James." My name fell from her lips like a stone dropped into still water. "How did you find me? Does it matter?" She stepped back instinctively, as if my presence might contaminate her carefully constructed new life. "You can't be here. If your mother discovers." "My mother has no power here." I moved closer, drinking in every detail of her face. The new lines around her eyes, the way she held herself more carefully, as if she'd learned not to take up too much space in the world. "And Charlotte broke our engagement 3 weeks ago." Victoria's eyes widened in shock. "What?" She realized what I should have understood months ago, that marrying someone you don't love destroys everyone involved. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Victoria, we need to talk." "No, we don't." She started to close the door, but I blocked it with my foot. "James, whatever you're thinking, whatever romantic notion brought you here, it's too late." "Is it?" Because I've spent 6 months dying without you, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to fight for us. Brave enough? Her voice cracked with bitter laughter. You want to talk about bravery? You stood there in that hotel room and let your mother call me a whore. You let her threaten to destroy my life. And you said nothing. The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was true. In the moment when Victoria had needed me to be strong, to stand up to my family and choose her over everything else, I'd been weak. You're right, I said quietly. I failed you. I was a coward who let duty and fear override love. But I'm here now, 6 months too late. Am I? I studied her face, looking for any sign that the love we'd shared still existed beneath the walls she'd built. Because if you can honestly tell me that you feel nothing for me anymore, if you can look me in the eyes and say that what we had meant nothing, then I'll leave and never bother you again. Victoria's composure finally cracked, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. Don't do this to me, James. Don't come here and ask me to tear open wounds that have barely started to heal. I love you. The words poured out with desperate intensity. I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life. I love the way you laugh at your own jokes, the way you get paint in your hair when you're working, the way you challenge everything I thought I knew about myself. I love your courage and your passion, and the way you make everything around you more beautiful just by existing. Stop. Victoria pressed her hands over her ears like a child trying to block out painful truths. Just stop. I won't stop because I can't stop. Do you think I haven't tried? Do you think I haven't spent every day for 6 months trying to forget the way you feel in my arms, the sound of your voice saying my name, the way you looked at me like I was someone worth loving? You were someone worth loving. The words exploded out of her with volcanic force. But that man disappeared the moment your mother walked through that hotel room door. That man let the woman he claimed to love be humiliated and threatened without saying a word in her defense. Her words cut deeper than any blade, but I forced myself not to flinch away from the truth they contained. You're right. I wasn't the man you deserved in that moment. But I'm here now trying to be that man. It's too late, James. Victoria wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of paint across her cheek. I built a life here. A good life. Quiet and safe and uncomplicated. Safe. I repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Is that really what you want? To be safe? Because the Victoria I fell in love with wasn't interested in safety. She was interested in truth and beauty and living every moment with passionate intensity. That Victoria was naive enough to believe that love could overcome anything. Her voice grew steadier, more resolved. This Victoria knows better. I looked past her into the cottage, seeing evidence of the life she'd built. Paintings that were technically perfect, but somehow lacking the fire I remember from her earlier work. A space that was comfortable but sterile compared to the chaotic beauty of her old studio. Are you happy? I asked simply. The question seemed to surprise her. I'm content. That's not the same thing. Sometimes contentment is enough. Sometimes it's better than the alternative. What alternative? Being brave enough to risk everything for something extraordinary. Victoria turned away from me, staring out at the ocean that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. You want to know about being brave, James? Being brave is walking away from everything you've ever wanted because stay would destroy both of you. Being brave is building a new life from nothing when the old one becomes impossible. Being brave is learning to live with a broken heart instead of demanding that the world rearrange itself to make you happy. And being brave, I said quietly, is admitting when you've made the biggest mistake of your life and asking for a chance to make it right. She was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the distant crash of waves against rocks. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Even if I want to try again, which I'm not saying I do, what's different now? Your family hasn't changed. Society hasn't changed. All the reasons we couldn't be together before still exist. What's different is me. I moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough to catch the familiar scent of jasmine and turpentine that still made my heart race. I'm not asking you to sneak around this time. I'm not asking you to be my secret. I'm asking you to be my wife. Victoria's breath caught audibly. James, I know it sounds crazy. I know I hurt you in ways that might be unforgivable, but I also know that what we had was real, and losing it nearly destroyed us both. I turned to face her fully. Marry me, Victoria. Not in some courthouse ceremony we're ashamed of, but in front of everyone who matters to us. Let me prove that I'm brave enough to choose love over everything else. You're asking me to give up the life I've built here. I'm asking you to build a new life with me. Wherever you want, New York, California, anywhere in the world where we can be happy together. Victoria was crying openly now, her walls crumbling piece by piece. You hurt me so badly, James. When you let your mother humiliate me, when you chose duty over love, it broke something inside me that I'm not sure could be fixed. Then let me spend the rest of my life trying to fix it. I reached for her hands, and this time she didn't pull away. Let me prove that I'm the man you fell in love with, the man who would walk through fire for you. And if your family disowns you, if society turns its back on you, if choosing me costs you everything you work for, then I'll consider myself the luckiest man alive, because I'll still have you. Victoria searched my face with desperate intensity, looking for any sign that this was another beautiful lie that would crumble under pressure. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy something deep inside her, because she finally stepped into my arms with a sob that sounded like surrender and victory combined. I never stopped loving you, she whispered against my chest. Not for a single day. I tried to hate you, tried to convince myself that you were just another privileged man who used women for his own pleasure. But I couldn't stop loving you, and it was killing me slowly. I held her tighter than I'd ever held anything in my life, feeling pieces of my soul click back into place after months of existing as only half a person. Then say yes. Say you'll marry me and spend the rest of your life letting me prove that I'm worthy of your love. Victoria pulled back to look into my eyes one more time, and I saw the exact moment when her last defenses crumbled. Yes, she whispered. God help us both, yes. We stood there in her small cottage overlooking the Pacific, holding each other as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with this extraordinary woman in the first place. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be family drama and social consequences, and 1,000 challenges I couldn't even imagine yet. But for the first time in 6 months, I felt truly alive again, complete in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Whatever storms were coming, we would face them together, and that made all the difference in the world. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a courier who waited patiently while I signed for the elegant cream envelope with hands that trembled more than I cared to admit. My name was written across the front in handwriting I would have recognized in my sleep. Even after all these years, James, if you're reading this, then I've kept my promise to write one last time. The doctors say I have perhaps a month, maybe less, and I find myself thinking of you more with each passing day. Not with sadness, never with sadness, but with the kind of profound gratitude that comes from having experienced something truly extraordinary. I wonder if you remember what I told you that first night at the cottage, about painting the moment before surrender. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about how the most beautiful moments in life exist in that space between longing and fulfillment, between the last breath of resistance and the first taste of ecstasy. Our entire love story existed in that space, didn't it? Every stolen moment was precious precisely because it was forbidden, every touch electric because it defied the world's expectations. We lived our greatest passion in the shadows, and perhaps that's where it was always meant to exist, too pure and consuming for the harsh light of everyday life. I had to stop reading, the words blurring as memories flooded back with devastating clarity. Victoria. Even now, at 57, her name could still make my heart race like a teenager's. I looked around my study, lined with legal texts and family photographs that chronicled a successful, respectable life, and remembered another study, another life, where paint-stained fingers had traced love letters across my skin. Asterisk, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd been braver that day in Mendocino? If I'd said yes to your beautiful proposal, and we'd built that life together? I do. Sometimes, especially when I see couples who've grown old together, their love deepened by decades of shared mornings and ordinary miracles. Asterisk. But then I remember that some loves are too intense to survive the weight of forever. Some passions burn so bright that they consume everything in their path, leaving only beautiful ash and memories that glow like embers in the darkness of more ordinary days. The doorbell chimed, interrupting my reading. Through the window, I saw Charlotte's silver Mercedes in the driveway. My wife of 24 years climbed out with her usual grace, carrying what looked like fabric samples for another of her endless charitable projects. Charlotte, beautiful, kind Charlotte, who had taken me back after the Mendocino incident with forgiveness I'd never deserved. She'd been waiting at my apartment when I returned from California, having somehow learned about my desperate cross-country pursuit of a ghost. Instead of anger or recrimination, she'd simply asked if I was ready to try again. Really try this time, with honesty and commitment and whatever damaged pieces of my heart I had left to offer. "I know I'll never have all of you," she'd said that night, her blue eyes holding a wisdom I'd never noticed before. "But I'd rather have whatever part of James Wellington is capable of love than spend my life wondering what might have been with someone else." We'd married 6 months later in a small ceremony that surprised Manhattan society with its intimacy. No grand cathedral, no society page spreads, just two people who understood that love came in many forms, some passionate and consuming, others steady and nurturing. Charlotte and I had built our marriage on the second kind, and it had been enough, more than enough. But Victoria's letter was awakening feelings I'd buried so deeply I'd almost convinced myself they were gone. I went back to New York eventually, about 5 years after Mendocino. I needed to see if the magic was still there, or if distance and time had revealed it as the beautiful illusion your mother always claimed it was. I stood outside that coffee shop in Greenwich Village where we used to meet, watching strangers occupy our corner table, drinking coffee that someone else had stirred with absent-minded passion. The waiter was different. The music had changed, but I swear I could still feel the ghost of your hand brushing mine as you passed the sugar. Asterisk, that's when I knew our love was real, James. Not because it lasted, but because it left marks on the world that time couldn't erase. Every place we'd been together still hummed with the memory of what we created there. I found myself reaching for my phone, driven by an impulse to call information, to track down her number and hear her voice one more time. But Victoria's letter seemed to anticipate even this impulse. "Don't try to find me now, my love. This letter is my gift to you. The closure we never had. The goodbye we were never allowed to say properly. What we had was perfect precisely because it was unfinished. A symphony stopped mid-note that continues playing in our hearts long after the instruments fall silent. I need you to know that I built a good life after you. I married a kind man named David, a poet who understood that my heart held rooms he'd never be allowed to enter and loved me anyway. We had a daughter, Sarah, who has your same impossible need to save everyone around her, though she channels it into medicine instead of law. I painted for 40 years, James. Painted sunrises that reminded me of your smile, storms that captured the chaos of our last fight, quiet moments that held all the peace I found after letting you go. My art was exhibited in galleries from San Francisco to Paris, and critics often commented on the passionate longing that seemed to infuse every piece I created. They never understood that I wasn't painting longing. I was painting love, the kind of love that transforms everything it touches, that makes ordinary moments transcendent, that burns so bright it illuminates everything for miles around even after the flame has gone out. Charlotte's key turned in the front door, followed by her cheerful call, "James, are you home?" I quickly folded Victoria's letter, slipping it into my desk drawer next to other mementos I'd collected over the years. Theater tickets from plays that reminded me of conversations we'd shared, pressed flowers from walks through parks that still made me think of her laughter. In here, I called back, my voice only slightly strained. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, carrying an armload of silk swatches, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the October wind. At 55, she was still beautiful in that timeless way of women who'd never needed to rely on physical perfection for their worth. "The committee can't agree on table linens for the charity luncheon," she said, spreading samples across my desk. "What do you think, ivory or champagne?" I looked at the fabrics, remembering another woman who would have laughed at such domestic concerns, who would have suggested using paint-stained canvas just to see the horrified expressions of Manhattan society matrons. Champagne, I said, because Victoria had always said champagne was a color of celebration, and I wanted to honor her memory in whatever small way I could. That evening, after Charlotte had gone to bed, I returned to my study and finished reading Victoria's letter. Asterisk, I want you to know that I never regretted loving you, James. Not the pain, not the impossible choices, not even the way it ended. You taught me that I was capable of a love so profound it could reshape my understanding of what it meant to be alive. That gift has colored every day since, even the one spent missing you. Asterisk. Asterisk, I hope your marriage has been happy. I hope Charlotte understands what a complex and beautiful man she married, how your capacity for love runs deeper than most people's ability to comprehend it. I hope you've been a good husband to her, the kind of man you learned to be through loving me. Asterisk. Asterisk, and I hope that sometimes, when you smell jasmine or hear jazz music playing in small cafes, you remember us not with sadness but with joy. Remember that for one perfect, impossible moment in time, two people found each other across a crowded ballroom and recognized their missing pieces. Asterisk. Asterisk, remember that what we had was real, James. It was beautiful and forbidden and ultimately unsustainable, but it was real. In a world full of convenient arrangements and comfortable compromises, we found something rare and precious and true. Asterisk. Asterisk, I'm not afraid of dying, my love. How could I be when I've already experienced the closest thing to heaven that exists on earth? I've been loved completely and loved completely in return. I've felt my soul merge with another's in moments of passion, so intense they seem to stop time itself. Asterisk. But I am afraid of being forgotten. So I'm asking you to remember for both of us. Remember the taste of coffee in that little Greenwich Village cafe where we first learned each other's dreams. Remember the weight of raindrops on the cottage windows while we made love by firelight. Remember the way I looked at you that first night, like you were the answer to questions I hadn't known I was asking. Remember that once upon a time, in a city full of million strangers, two hearts recognized each other across an impossible divide and chose love over safety, passion over propriety, truth over convenience. Even if only for a moment, remember us, James. And when you do, know that somewhere in whatever comes after this life, I'm still loving you with the same desperate intensity that defined our every stolen moment. Forever yours, Victoria. P.S. I kept your letters. All of them. Sarah will find them someday and understand that her mother was once young and foolish and brave enough to love someone with her entire being. I hope that knowledge brings her joy rather than confusion. There's a painting waiting for you at the Meridian Gallery in Soho. It's called First Dance, and it's my gift to you, the only visual record of that night in the ballroom when our eyes met and changed everything. I painted it from memory, but every detail is perfect because that moment is burned into my soul like a brand. Go look at it, my darling. See us as we were when we were young and believe that love could conquer any obstacle. And know that no matter how many years pass, no matter how many other lives we live, somewhere in the space between memory and dream, we're still dancing. I sat in my study until dawn, holding Victoria's letter and remembering every moment of our impossible love affair. The way she'd stirred her coffee with unconscious sensuality. The feel of her skin against mine in that cottage beside the lake. The sound of her laughter cutting through pretentious chatter at society functions where she never belonged, but somehow made everything more beautiful just by being present. 3 days later, I found myself standing in front of First Dance in the Meridian Gallery, staring at a painting that captured not just the physical reality of our first meeting, but the emotional truth of it. Victoria had painted us as we'd been that night. Young, hopeful, standing on the edge of something that would transform us both forever. But she'd also painted something else, the weight of everything that would come after. In the shadows at the edge of the canvas, you could see the price that passionate love demands, the complications, the impossible choices, the beautiful tragedy of wanting something you can never fully have. It's extraordinary, isn't it? I turned to find a young woman standing beside me, her dark hair and green eyes marking her unmistakably as Victoria's daughter. Sarah. She had her mother's artistic eye, but something else as well, a piece that Victoria had never quite achieved. You must be James, she said simply, and you're Sarah. Mom told me you might come. She said you'd be the man who couldn't look away from the painting, who saw it the way she intended it to be seen. We stood in comfortable silence, both studying the visual record of a love that had been too intense for the ordinary world to contain. Was she happy? I asked finally. Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. Different kind of happy at different times. But yes, she said that loving you taught her how to recognize authentic joy when she found it again. That even though you broke her heart, you also opened it wide enough for everything good that came after. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She wanted me to tell you something if you came. Sarah's voice gentled. She said to tell you that what you had was worth everything it cost. Every moment of pain, every impossible choice, every year spent missing what could never be recovered. She said that kind of love justifies a lifetime, even if it only lasts a season. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in decades, Asterisk Victoria Martinez died today. Not literally. That happened 3 weeks ago, according to the obituary I finally found online. But today she died for me, becoming fully memory instead of lingering possibility. Asterisk. I realize now that our love story was never meant to have a traditional happy ending. We were never supposed to grow old together, never supposed to weather the ordinary storms that erode most passions into comfortable affection. We were meant to burn bright and brief, like a meteor streaking across a dark sky, beautiful precisely because it was temporary, memorable because it was impossible. She was right about the moment before surrender. We lived our entire relationship in that space, always on the edge of giving completely, but never quite able to claim each other fully. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. The constant tension between desire and restraint, between what we wanted and what the world would allow. I have been a good husband to Charlotte. I have built a successful career, raised money for worthy causes, lived the kind of life that makes sense on paper. But Victoria was my great love, my one moment of complete aliveness, my proof that the human heart is capable of feelings too large for ordinary life to contain. I will not mourn what we lost, because I now understand that we lost nothing. What we had was complete in itself. A perfect story that needed no sequel, a song that was meant to end on a high note rather than fade slowly away. But I will remember, as she asked, as she deserved, as the world demands of those who have witnessed something truly extraordinary. I will remember the woman who taught me that safety is overrated, that passion is worth any price, that some loves are too pure for this world but too powerful to ever truly die. I will remember Victoria Martinez, and in remembering, I will keep alive the part of myself that she awakened, the part that knew how to love without limits, without conditions, without fear. Some loves last forever not because they endure, but because they transform us so completely that we carry them in every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of joy we're brave enough to claim. Asterisk Victoria was my transformation. She was my proof that fairy tales exist, even if they don't always end with happily ever after. Asterisk. Some fairy tales end with once upon a time. Two people loved each other so completely that death itself could not diminish what they created together. That is enough. That is everything. That is love eternal.